As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
The clash between the Biden administration and Texas spilled out into the open last week when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that federal authorities could remove razor wire that Texas Governor Greg Abbott had been installing along the border with Mexico to stop the millions of illegal immigrants from crossing over to the United States. This time, Abbott did not back down. Instead, he issued a statement declaring that an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution is underway and invoking Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. Here, Governor Abbott answers an important question I brought up back in my 1988 U.S. presidential run. At what point do open borders and mass illegal immigration into the United States become an invasion, which would grant governors the authority and obligation to take action? By some estimates, more than 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed into the United States during the 3 years of the Biden administration. These illegals likely mostly came from Mexico and Central America, but the fact is we have no idea how many of them may be arriving from, for example, the Middle East or other war-torn areas of the world. Last month, even the New York Times wrote of the disaster on the U.S. border that thousands of migrants are arriving at the border every day, trekking from the furthest reaches of the globe, from Africa to Asia to South America, driven by relentless violence, desperation, and poverty. With the world awash in U.S. weapons, it's not hard to imagine the danger of the situation. It is a problem that the Biden administration is not willing to tackle, likely for political reasons, particularly in an election year. And Biden found an ally in the U.S. Supreme Court and Chief Justice John Roberts with the ruling that federal agents may begin removing barriers set up by Texas authorities. But the intensity of the dispute became apparent this time when 25 Republican-led states issued statements in support of Texas. It began to look like a showdown, and many even began to invoke words like secession. However, if the Biden administration intends to use the Supreme Court ruling to take action against the Texas border barrier, there are more immediate ways of defending the border. Representative Thomas Massie took to Twitter last week to recount a meeting he and a group of U.S. House members had with the late Justice Antonin Scalia. At the breakfast, Massie wrote, Justice Scalia told the group to quit complaining about the Supreme Court rulings and start defunding rulings they oppose. As Massie explained in another tweet, Congress can render the 5-4 Supreme Court decision against Texas irrelevant by simply refusing to fund Biden's removal of border security measures. Nullification through the power of the purse is an important tool given to Congress in the U.S. Constitution, and it could be easily exercised in this case. Biden is clearly playing politics with the immigration crisis, claiming last week that as soon as Congress passes yet another immigration reform bill, one that includes $100 billion in military welfare for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, he will take steps to address the border. Congress should reject this blackmail, and U.S. states should continue to take measures, including nullification of the Supreme Court ruling to protect against invasion. Thanks for listening.
So the Pentagon said on Monday that Iran bears responsibility for the drone attack in northeastern Jordan that killed 3 American troops, but admitted it has no evidence that Iran was directly involved. Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said the responsibility fell on Iran due to its support for the Iraqi Shia militias the U.S. believes carried out the attack. And as I've said before, by that logic, that means the U.S. thinks Hamas is in its right to attack the U.S. because it provides support and weapons to Israel, and Russia has the right to attack the U.S. because it provides weapons and support for Ukraine. So one group that Singh said the U.S. believes was responsible is Kateb Hezbollah, which is one of the main Shia militias in Iraq. She said, quote, in terms of attribution for the attack, we know this is an Iran-backed militia. It has the footprints of Kateb Hezbollah, but we are not making a final assessment. Iran continues to arm and equip these groups to launch these attacks, and we will certainly hold them responsible, end quote. When asked if the U.S. knew Iran and Iranian leaders were... So the question that she was explicitly asked, do you know if Iran was actually behind the attack, as in planned it, coordinated it, or directed it? And Singh admitted that the U.S. had nothing that shows that the U.S. has no evidence at all to say that they directed the attack. She said, quote, "We know that Iran certainly plays a role with these groups. They arm and equip and fund these groups. I don't have more to share on terms of an intelligence assessment on its leaders in Iran were directing this attack," end quote. She was again asked about the claim that Iran was behind the attack and said that the U.S. just knows that Iran funds the groups and that she had nothing more to add. But later in the press conference, she said Iran bears responsibility for the killing of the 3 American soldiers. Also on Monday, the New York Times reported that U.S. intelligence officials have no evidence Iran had advanced knowledge of the attack. The report reads, quote, "American intelligence officials say that while Iran provides weapons, funding, and sometimes intelligence to its proxy groups, there is no evidence that it calls the shots, meaning it may not have known in advance about the attack in Jordan," end quote. And this isn't just this attack in Jordan that they're talking about. This is also the 160 attacks the Pentagon has said that has happened in Iraq and Syria since mid-October. Through all this time, they still say they don't know if Iran is directing these attacks. So the next one here, Iran denies role in drone attack that killed 3 U.S. troops. So Iran came out with a official denial of this. And again, they say that these resistance factions are targeting the U.S. because of the U.S.-backed Israeli massacre in Gaza, not because Iran is directing them. So this is the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman. He said, quote, "As we have clearly stated before, the resistance groups in the region are responding to the war crimes and genocide of the child-killing Zionist regime, and they do not take orders from the Islamic Republic of Iran. These groups decide and act based on their own principles and priorities as well as the interests of their country and people," end quote. So Israeli airstrikes hit targets south of the Syrian capital of Damascus on Monday, killing and injuring a number of people. This was reported by Syrian media. And both Syria and Iran denied reports that said strikes killed Iranian nationals or Iranian military advisors. When I first saw this, there was these reports that said Iranian IRGC members might have been killed in this. And, that's definitely alarming because it seems like Israel is trying to provoke a war here, a major war, possibly with Iran. And that's one way to do it. Just last week, about a week ago, Israel killed 5 members of the IRGC in Syria, in Damascus. So, but they're saying that didn't happen. Both Syria and Iran have denied that. But Israel has really ramped up its airstrikes in Syria. They've bombed Syria for years with impunity, but since October 7th, they've really ramped them up. And they could have been trying to kill Iranians with this. Netanyahu's thinking if he's trying to provoke a war, considering some American troops were just killed, he's figuring the U.S. is probably going to hit Iran. Why doesn't he hit Iran right now too? The reports say that the Syrian media reported that a number of people were killed and wounded in this attack. And then I saw Iranian media said 2 civilians were killed. That's what they said, according to preliminary reports. So this is another one from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. It says that President Biden is working on a document that would promise military assistance to Ukraine for the next decade. The White House hopes to get congressional approval and prevent Donald Trump from changing course in Ukraine if he is elected. And this could, they're trying to handcuff any future president. With the commitment to Kiev, Biden is seeking President Zelensky to adopt a defensive position and abandon aspirations to retake territory. The Washington Post reports that the White House is working with the State Department to compile a document that will pledge short and long-term military assistance to Ukraine. The administration will seek congressional buy-in, and a portion of the policy will be included in that $61 billion for Ukraine that Biden's still trying to get Congress to approve. The Republicans still haven't agreed on a border deal yet. And the types of things in this document, they say the specific promises and programs that will help protect, reconstitute, and expand Ukraine's industrial and export base and assist the country with political reforms needed for full integration into Western institutions. And a U.S. official said that the hope is that the long-term promise will also future-proof aid for Ukraine against the possibility that former President Trump wins his re-election bid. So they just want to make sure that they can keep supporting Ukraine for years and years and years to come. North Korea tests cruise missiles and blasts U.S. war games, so tensions are still very high on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea slammed the U.S. and South Korea for inching the peninsula toward the brink of war with a series of war games. After Pyongyang issued the statement, North Korea test-fired several cruise missiles. So in a statement published by North Korea's state media, Pyongyang warned Washington and Seoul of ruthless punishment if war broke out, and the statement highlighted 5 military drills between the U.S., South Korea, and Japan conducted this month. So Japan's been getting in on the action here. North Korea argued that war games involving strategic weapon systems were highly provocative. The statement said, quote, "The current situation in which frantic nuclear war drills are being staged against the DPRK from the outset of the new year requires the DPRK to be fully prepared for a war and thoroughly deter the U.S. and its stooges' invasion with overwhelming power. We showed on various occasions that our cutting-edge military hardware are not for demonstration and legalized the Korean-style nuclear doctrine on the use of nuclear forces long ago," end quote. And North Korea also conducted a missile test on Sunday. So these things, this is just an area that so few people are really aware of, how bad the tensions are right now.
Don't tread on us. The progressive says, the thing about America is America engaged in slavery and colonialism. Unequivocally true. However, it turns out that slavery is probably the least unique thing about America. Looking at the Code of Ur-Nammu from Mesopotamia, written in the Sumerian language, in 2100 BC, mentions slavery 7 times. 2 examples: if a slave marries a slave and that slave is set free, he does not leave the household. If a slave escapes from city limits and someone returns him, the owner shall pay 2 shekels to the one who returned him. The Code of Hammurabi from 1755 before Christ mentions harboring fugitive slaves, marriage of women to slaves, warranties on sale of slaves, purchase of slaves abroad, going as far as to say, if a slave should declare to his master, "You are not my master," he, the master, should bring charge and proof against him that he is indeed the slave, and his master shall cut off his ear. At the height of American slavery, 1860, the population was 31.4 million people. There were around 393,000 slave owners. So at its height, we had about 1% of the people owning slaves. And that's the generalization that is given to Americans. Court ruling on Anthony Johnson and his servant from 1655. The Northampton County Court ruled in favor of Anthony Johnson, a free man of African descent, when he was accused of keeping an indentured servant as a slave. The social justice advocate, who sees everything in terms of oppressor versus oppressed, doesn't say it's the initiating violence that's wrong. They just focus on the skin color. So we should not be surprised when they don't understand that something like military conscription, most recently implemented by Vladimir Zelensky on February 24th of 2022, forcing people to perform terrible things in the worst working conditions imaginable, getting post-traumatic stress disorder, getting your limbs blown off, often dying, and they have no analysis of this because they don't understand or have yet to accept the principle that the Free Staters are providing. So they will often say that war has quite a bit to do about skin color. That's why we're okay with it happening to Muslims and people in the Middle East. The hole in this theory is that the same war hawks constantly brag about the mass white death of the American Revolution, the American Civil War, sometimes the Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, and they brag about the Second World War as well. In the First World War in America alone, there were 2.8 million conscripts out of the 4.8 million in the military. And in just those 2 to 3 years that America was part of it, 116,000 men were killed, many of them enslaved. On to the sexism part of social justice. There is a term called mansplaining, where men, in a very derogatory way, explain something frequently to a woman. Now, I went to school for, like 12 or 13 years. And a lot of that time was spent by people talking about really trivial stuff that was wasting my time and giving me busy work. All of them happened to be women, and it never occurred to me to come up with a term like, oh, look, the woman-splainers of the classroom are back, thanks so much. It would never occur to me to negatively judge people by their gender or race. Yet, it's the first thing that comes to mind of the Democrats who seek to divide us and destroy the social cooperation which makes the free market so great. Barack Obama comes out and says the wage gap is not myth, it's math, saying that disparities in income are proof of discrimination. They say corporations just want money. Also, they pay men 25% more just because they're men, and they only care about money. Apparently, the sitting president held this actual belief. Turns out the wage gap doesn't account for the type of job being worked, number of hours worked, number of skills, the experience, or the value created. If both Mila Kunis and I do the same job, we create different value, so she's going to get paid way more. Nothing nefarious, no need to start a Male Lives Matter movement and start ruining people's businesses they've worked decades to build. Women, while 50% of the population, make up 89% of public elementary school teachers. So what? This is the result of choice. There is nothing wrong with disparities that we see everywhere, including nature. Tornadoes are not evenly distributed around the world. Hurricanes are not evenly distributed. Zebras are not evenly distributed around the world. We don't find equality anywhere in nature. Workplace deaths, Bureau of Labor Statistics 2018. 413 women died on the job. Men, 4,837. No evidence of discrimination. Men tend to take more risk in the job marketplace. Nothing nefarious about that at all. We see inequality everywhere. Brian Kaplan, author of Don't Be a Feminist, says, you can make this unnecessary divide in the same exact opposite direction than feminists do. For example, men are overrepresented at the bottom levels of society. They do most of the nasty, dangerous work and are much more likely to be homeless or imprisoned and much more likely to kill themselves. Men spend much more time on the job than women. The law heavily favors women in child custody support disputes. Men are more likely to be victims of violent crime. Men are much more likely to die in combat. In fact, during serious military conflicts, they face military slavery, the draft. For more on that, check out the Selective Service Act. Thank you, Jimmy Carter. Women sometimes view men as success objects. Other examples, men pay more for car insurance because they are more aggressive and get in more accidents. Men pay more for life insurance. They take more risks and die younger. There's a spending gap. When a man and a woman go on a date, it tends to be the man who pays. What an injustice. Who gives a fuck? These are people making voluntary exchanges. Finally, the one that I was actually brought to the light from, Louis J. Gomez, passively mentioned, how barbaric is circumcision? The baby's first experience out of the womb, and they torture it. And I saw 1 or 2 videos, and I changed my mind in 5 minutes. I'm like, this is absolute sexist torture. One example of sexism, okay. When it comes to disparities in wealth, the average 20-year-old, according to Forbes, earns $38,000 a year. The average 45-year-old earns $64,000 a year. Anyone think we need an equal age pay legislation? Please, Nancy Pelosi, give us equal pay. Yeah, there's probably a disparity because they have different jobs and everything else. Black Enterprise Institute finds that the Nielsen research finds that the median household income for foreign-born blacks is 30% higher than US-born blacks. There is a disparity as a result of skills. It's not just the skin color, which progressives make all of us worse off by focusing on. Actually, they make themselves feel terrific for about 5 minutes a day, so never mind, keep up the good work. Median US household income in 2018 from the US Census Bureau, these are the groups that earned more than whites. Indian Americans, Taiwanese Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Pakistani, Filipino, Indonesian, Korean, Cambodian, Hmong, and Vietnamese. And we should not ever vilify people based on their income unless they get it through involuntary methods. There's also state inequality. Maryland, according to World Population Review, has a median household income of $87,000 a year, while Mississippi, $46,511. There is no reason Mississippians and Marylandians should hate each other or say, there's Maryland privilege, quick, grow the state again. Oprah Winfrey has a net worth of $3.5 billion. Any guesses as to her siblings, Patricia Lee, Lloyd Jeffrey Lee, and Patricia Lofton? 1 billion, 2 billion? Turns out you can't even find it. It's so small. Unfortunately, one of them passed away. They also are extremely unequal in the amount of airtime that they got. These are people who are directly related and in many cases grew up in the same household, and we don't see equality between them. Yet the progressive says, we should see equality between all the groups and all the demographics and all the countries and all the ages. We would never expect that. Barack Obama, roughly around $70 million net worth, loved by millions, gets to murder people and get away with it and gets a Nobel Peace Prize. His brother George Obama lives in the slums of Nairobi, and's claim to fame was once interviewed by Dinesh D'Souza. There is inequality between families. I had to Google the Baldwin brothers. That has to be an example. Alec Baldwin, 120 times wealthier than his second wealthiest sibling. This is something referred to as the Iron Law of Oligarchy. How many people can write a song as good as Marshall Mathers? How many people can manage a company as good as Steve Jobs? And what percentage of people would you say are as funny as Chris Rock? We don't see equality anywhere. Iron Law of Oligarchy is defined. Rule by an elite or oligarchy is inevitable as an iron law within any democratic organization as part of the tactical and technical necessities of the organization. Very domineering personalities tend to get more attention than others. Michaels' theory states that all complex organizations, regardless of how democratic they are when started, eventually develop into oligarchies. Michaels observed that since no sufficiently large and complex organization can function purely as a direct democracy, power within an organization will always be delegated to individuals within that group, elected or otherwise. The example he gives is, say that you have a workplace and you are just so sick of the bourgeoisie, you can't take another day of them, so you form a union. Well, not everyone wants to go to this union meeting, and not everyone has ideas for the union meeting. Not everyone's going to speak up about their ideas. Not everyone's ideas are going to get equal support. So you end up with Jimmy Hoffa and his 3 friends running the meeting in an oligarchical form. The Iron Law of Oligarchy is why progressivism is a fool's errand.
I guess if I were to be asked, I would say, well, you first have to ask the question, why do we have this mess? And recognize it is a real mess, and it's not going to be cured by waving a wand and saying, oh, but behave yourself, and we'll work at this, we'll have another conference, that sort of thing. That's not going to work. But I don't think they're going to come, and I've made fun of those who, and I mentioned it yesterday, that why don't you look to history? And I mentioned looking to the history of Ronald Reagan. When he got into trouble, he did something he said he wouldn't do, but it was the best thing in the nation, and that was just get out of the way. And so he walks away from Lebanon, and he didn't suffer. He still remained the most popular president ever, and he probably saved lives by doing that. But no, they're not interested in that. They have control of the pro military group, the military industrial complex, and so no matter how ridiculous the policy seems, it seems like they're going to do it anyway, over and above what the people deserve and what our Constitution requires. And this is the reason this same thing continues. So Biden's team is searching for what to do, but I think he's searching in all the wrong places. He doesn't have any basic principles to follow. I don't think there's a whole lot of Republicans in leadership over the years, nor Democrats, that really follow the precepts of the Constitution and foreign policy. Oh, that's something that's always bipartisan, and do that. Lately, though, there's been some healthy division and discussion, but at least they should have discussed why and what are they doing, what's being done wrong. Is there a principle that we haven't followed that we're now, resolved in protecting an empire where we can't even protect, the rights of the people here in this country?
Breaking, President Biden says he has made a decision on how to respond to the drone attack in Jordan and that he holds Iran responsible. Now, the juxtaposition of those two parts of the phrase suggests that his decision involves an attack on Iran, although that's not explicit, and he doesn't go into it when he's interviewed here about what that decision might be. But it's interesting, the phrasing, he holds Iran responsible. Now go to the next one. Here's Dave DeKemp's write-up at antiwar.com. Pentagon admits it has no evidence that Iran was behind the drone attack that killed 3 U.S. troops. They say that Iran bears responsibility for the attack, but they admit they have no evidence Iran was directly involved. The Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh said the responsibility fell on Iran due to its support for Iraqi Shia militias that the U.S. believes carried out the attack. The only thing that's interesting about this, Dr. Paul, the main thing that's interesting is that so the U.S. says we reserve the right to bomb Iran because Iran is funding and providing weapons to these militias. Well, by that measure, Russia should have the authority to bomb the United States because the United States is training, supplying, and financing the Ukrainians. So it's a corner they're backed into. But by that logic, Russia can attack France. All of the missiles that have hit Russian territory that are not military related.
But you don't fully understand that their job is to teach people to reject the principle of logic.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Throw in a few logistical things out there, won't solve the problem. But we still have to do that because eventually we'll run out of steam, we'll run out of money, and we might even run out of bombs. Right now they're stirring around, and therefore they have to come up with something else.
This next clip will give you one. This is Flight Tracker, and it tracks aircraft. And it says there are 6 KC-135 refueling tankers that flew across the Atlantic. Now, they took off from March Air Force Base out in California, near where I used to live, actually, where I grew up. So you have 6 refueling tankers headed to the Iraq-Syria border, and you can see them tracking to that border itself. There are a couple of reasons, and I'm not a military expert, I don't pretend to be one, but there are a few reasons why they may have them in the air. One of them may be, why do you need tankers? Well, you need them when you have fighter jets in the air for an extended period of time. They can refuel. It may be that some of our bases are vulnerable there to a retaliation from Iran, and they want to get those fighters in the air so they can't get hit in their bases. We don't know exactly what it is, but there's something planned. They're certainly getting things ready, which should be expected. But let's just kind of take a little trip down memory lane, because now Sky News reported last night that Biden is going to authorize an attack in retaliation. And that's a funny word because no one said Congress, and there are a few members of Congress who said, well, hang on a minute, that's our job. But let's take a little trip down memory lane, Dr. Paul, to Joe Biden of 2020. And here's what he said when Donald Trump was president. He said, let's be clear, Donald Trump does not have the authority to take us into war with Iran without congressional approval. A president should never take this nation to war without the informed consent of the American people. Joe Biden, before he was president.
Do you think he was sleepy even back then?
He might have been a little sleepy.
See, I think someone maybe helped him write that. Isn't that so sad? And whole thing is when you showed me the U.S. airplane carrying fuel and all that, and I think of all the people that are supporting these wars and Biden, but they are also environmentalists.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the hydrocarbons?
Oh, yeah.
You know, even the Kerrys and the others who fly private jets, it adds up, and it's the inconsistency. It isn't that you have to endorse carelessness on pollution, but the whole thing is the hypocrisy of it all. You know, to say that we have to be very careful, and yet they don't blink an eye when they talk about war.
Yeah.
If you're involved, say, on the debate about the Israelis against the Palestinians, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, a little hydrocarbon isn't going to hurt anything because of the importance of that. So,
Cost of America's post 9/11 wars. Now I found this on Twitter, but it's fascinating. I've seen nothing there that seems out of the ordinary. But looking at it in a graphic form is always very dramatic. Consider the war on terror. Congress has funded $8 trillion. 60% of that $8 trillion has gone to contractors. Military contractor stocks are up between 331 and 1,235%. That is Lockheed Martin, 1,235% increase in stock. So if you bought that stock, you're making out well. On the downside, if you're downstream from that, the taxpayer cost $8 trillion. The death toll, 4.5 million. Displaced people, 38 million. Taxpayer migrant cost unknown. But it's a very dramatic chart showing you who really benefits from the, quote, war on terror, which continues to this day. It's not the American people.
yeah, that's for darn sure. It continues, and unless people think in terms of policy rather than a technical decision, and maybe one day to get the edge on the other, it'll be all this improvising, and they've been conditioned now for 30, 40 years where we never really had to think about the danger of spending. But there's more and more people pointing this out because it just can't continue. And there's more and more people that are closer to the establishment are saying, you know, this can be a big deal and a really bad deal. But right now, you know, we work hard on foreign policy because it is a big deal. So if you take the foreign policy and the interest on the debt, I mean, you're talking about a lot of money. And if you say, well, what would you do with all that money? Well, we wouldn't decide. We'd just give it to the people.
Yeah.
And maybe there wouldn't be so many street people. Maybe there would be jobs for people that where they don't live out, and the homelessness level would go down. So that would be fine. But nobody thinks in that term because they can get away with it. And you know, it's the counterfeiting is a really good industry as long as you can get away with it. As long as nobody discovers that you're passing out counterfeit money.
Yeah.
When they discover it, there's a race to dump it. And see what happens. So.